You've recently made some changes to your organization, moving people to new roles with updated mandates. You're excited as this new structure addresses many of the pain points your team has formally come to talk to you about. Lack of clarity around roles and responsibilities, duplication of effort, as well as provides some career opportunities for a few of the team members. You roll out the changes without a hitch. But you're surprised to find out a few months later that Maureen is still contacting clients about renewals, even though that's clearly Anna's mandate in the new organizational structure. Joel is managing his budget in a separate spreadsheet on his computer outside of the process that Tony, who's responsible now for departmental budgets, has rolled out. How did this happen? And more importantly, how do you get things back on track? Hi, I'm Alana Gregory from IG Tac Consulting, and join me for this third chapter in our change management series, where we'll look at 3 common change management models that provide approaches to being more successful, bringing others on board with your change efforts, and achieving that desired result. Applying change management has a direct impact on how quickly people adopt the change. Think about your project schedule, amount of participation or ultimate utilization. Think about that example we talked about in one of the previous chapters where you had a perfect product but nobody used it. And lastly, how well employees are able to perform in that new environment or that future state. This is about their knowledge, their abilities, their proficiency to be successful in this new state. All makes sense, but how do you do this? Let's dive in. If you go to the search bar of your browser and type in change management, you're going to get about 10, probably more than a dozen returns in terms of the different change management models. In this session, we're going to look at 3 of the more popular models: Adcar, Kotter, and Lewin. Developed by the founder of Prosci, Jeff Hyatt, the ADKAR model for change focuses on the goals or outcomes needed to achieve that lasting change. It's based on 20 years of research, which started in the late 90s, and it focused on individual change, as without individuals changing, the organizational change can't happen. For another way to put this is, if people are doing things different, there's no change. Therefore, the model and the structure of the model ensures that each individual experiencing change is moving through these 5 phases to ensure that that overall change is successful. Where did they come from? Well, the research was really conversations with different product leaders, project leaders, teams, etc. on what worked, what didn't work, and what they would do differently. And as a result, here are the 5 stages. The first, this is our why of change. Awareness is about awareness for the need of change. And just knowing that there's a change, that it's needed, isn't sufficient to create that desire for change. And so this second block, desire, is often identified as the most difficult of the 5 building blocks because it's ultimately a personal decision. I can't make you want to change. You have to want to change. Therefore, this change, or this stage of change, is all about moving from awareness to motivators for change. This could be incentives, gains or consequences, penalties, risks, creating a sense of belonging, etc. Then we get to the third stage, and this is when we often jump to knowledge and we get right in there and we focus right on training. But without those first 2 steps, awareness and desire, this block on knowledge cannot be effectively achieved. The other thing to think about is that when we talk about knowledge within the ADKAR model, we're really thinking about it from 2 aspects. Do we have the knowledge on how to change, so what we need to be doing during the transition, and do we have the knowledge of what it means to perform effectively in that future state? That leads us to the 4th block, ability, which might sound similar to knowledge, but the model really recognizes that there's a difference between knowing about a new skill, so what tools, the process, what the right technique is, to translating that knowledge into performance or ability. That's this 4th step, 4th block, ability. The last block, the final block, is reinforcement, and it's about making the change stick. I see the need, I have the desire, I know how, and I have the ability, but now I have to keep doing it. I need to make this new state my new current state. Dr. John Kotter's 8-step process was also developed through research, and in fact it was 4 decades of research observing organizations and leaders going through change and identifying success factors. And these success factors were combined into the methodology, and he introduced that in a book called Leading Change in the mid-90s. 8 steps, but we can categorize them as follows. First, you need to create a climate for change. You need to create a sense of urgency, build a team with the right people, form a vision. Next, you need to engage and enable. You need to enlist that volunteer army. This is also known as communication for buy-in, so we need to get that coalition together. We need to enable or empower for action or remove those barriers. We need to generate short-term wins. And lastly, we need to sustain the change. Don't let up. We need to make it stick. This is about instituting the change into our lives. Perhaps one of the earliest models is Kurt Lewin's change model, which was introduced in the 1940s, and he used an ice metaphor to propose the 3 phases that organizations would go through from current state to future state. So imagine you have a block, a square of ice that you would like to change into a cone. What would you need to do? Well, the first thing you would need to do is actually unfreeze it. So you have to melt it so that you're able to change the shape. Next, you'd mold it into that shape, in this case a cone, and that's the actual change implementation. And lastly, you want to keep it in that new shape, the cone, so you need to refreeze it so it maintains that new shape. You'll see that in Lewin's model, it clearly identifies that this is an ongoing or continuous cycle of change, as we are always reshaping to a new current state. 3 models. Which one's the best? Well, while there are differences in nomenclature or level of depth between the models, as you look at these various models, there are some common elements, and we can look at those common elements as best practices or key tenets for change. The first is importance of why. We need to have that clarity, that awareness, that understanding of why we're changing. Secondly, we cannot achieve change alone. You need to be building out that coalition, that sponsorship, that team of champions to help gain that support for the change. And lastly, reinforcement, reinforcement, reinforcement. We need to make that change, that future state, our new current state. Now that you've been introduced to a few of the change management models, which provide some structure or overview on how for change management, join me in our next chapter, chapter 4, where we're going to get more tactical and look at some of the tools that are available to support that how for successful change management.